am Draken, and this is the Draken Spaceworks, which is my brand new channel dedicated just to Star Citizen and bring you all the latest news from Star Citizen. I'm not bringing the latest news, more to case of me talking about my points of view based on what I've seen coming out in the last week from CIG in regards to Star Citizen itself. Now, this is the second episode we've done. The first episode we released last week, and you may have heard, if you listened to the last episode, a lot of noise like this, which is basically because I gesture a lot with my hands. I move around a lot when turning around and talking, and it was causing a bit of interference, and I realised it when I played back the recording last time. So I'm going to try and sit on my hands this week and not make as much background noise as possible, so you can just hear me talking through this and the music. Hopefully that will improve things. But in the meantime, yeah, please, if you do enjoy this, if any of this actually sort of rings a chord with you, please do leave us a like and a subscription. I'd very much appreciate it. Don't forget, we've got a couple of other channels. We've got our main channel, the Minecraft channel, that's the Draken Gameworks, that's been going for a while. And we've also got Draken Gameworks 2, where we've been doing a Satisfactory playthrough at the moment over there, so definitely go and check those ones out as well. But in the meantime, let's crack on with this week. So this week, we've had a Inside Star Citizen that's come out regarding capacitor gameplay, but also was talking about missile gameplay as well, and operator modes, which was looking really exciting. So let's start with the missile gameplay, because the missile gameplay, first of all, was the one that first grabbed me and made me go, ooh, they're actually changing the way combat's working. I sort of had to go back and redo capacitors to get capacitors properly. But and again, they're very exciting. But the missile gameplay was the one that grabbed me first. And the reason the missile gameplay grabbed me first was because it's also had this option of operator modes. So if you didn't see the Inside Star Citizen yet, basically what they're saying is that they've got all these different types of modes that you could be doing as a pilot in the ship. If you're just like a solo pilot, you probably have options to all of the ones that are relevant to your ship. But if you're in like a multi-crew vessel, then the pilot would probably be the one concentrating on the operator mode for flying, while there might be someone else who would be concentrating on one of the other operator modes. And some of the examples they have of operator modes already in there are things like scanning, for example, or the option of the mining modes, for example. When you go into mining mode, I imagine salvaging probably would have its own operating mode when that gets introduced as well. You have the mode for when you're firing your weapons, you have your mode for when you're flying around, and a new mode, the way they're splitting it up is they're going to introduce now a missile mode. So there is a missile mode that is separate to your normal sort of weapon mode for your normal guns. This is a separate mode which, you know, if you're on your own in a ship and you have a ship that's capable of guns and missiles, then you can just flick between the two. You can't use both at the same time. You would have to flick, use your guns 1 minute and then switch over to your missile mode. But if you're in a multi-crew vessel, it may be that the pilot has access to the weapons, but then the co-pilot has access to the missiles. And they would then be able to track and fire off at missiles that separately at different people and sort out the timing there, which I really quite like. I like this option. And the reason why I like this option, it reminds me of something that I used to do right back in a very old game. Funnily enough, another Chris Roberts game. It was a game called Privateer. So it was like, Privateer was supposedly the space trading sim game that was based on the Wing Commander universe. And you could say it was the predecessor to Freelancer, which you could also say Freelancer was the predecessor to Star Citizen. All Chris Roberts games, basically. Privateer was one of the very first ones with that. And I used to, when I was in college, I used to go around like my best friend's house at the time, who used to have a copy of that on his PC, and we used to multi-crew his ships, even though the game was a single-player game. It wasn't multiplayer at all. I mean, Freelancer was, but Privateer wasn't. And we used to just both play on his PC, and we'd share the keyboard, and he would be controlling, sort of moving the ship around and firing and attacking and flying it around, and I would then be looking out for opponents and operating the missiles or the torpedoes. And you become quite an effective team, because then I could spot people and I could turn around and get the timing right on the torpedoes that was better. You know, it used to be on the space bar, so I used to just spam the space bar. Back at the beginning of the days of proper old school torpedo spam. All the controversy, we'll talk about that as we go through, but all the controversy that's involved in that. But it was good fun. It was good fun, and we used to be as a two-man team doing that, and it was really good and enjoyable. And it was kind of that sort of multi-crew gameplay that I miss and would love to see being implemented properly into Star Citizen and this idea like where you have one person, and the moment they mentioned about this idea of having one person doing the missiles and one person flying the ship, it was just like, it reminded me straight back then of my college days and the fun we used to have on these old school PCs and old school games while screaming to the retros that you must die by the weapons that I adore. Anyone who knows Privateer will get that. If you don't know Privateer, that'll probably go straight over your heads, that reference. But yeah, it was a good fun doing it as a multi-crew sort of thing on there, even though the game wasn't designed for multi-crew. And that was just in that very, very basic way of just adapting that in that sort of sense. But obviously later on, we got the Star Citizen coming along now, which is doing the same thing. And I'm looking forward to that because hopefully it'll open up so much more. I'm looking forward to seeing how that will get implemented with the multi-crew level. But the other bit as well about it is that I'm really intrigued by how the missiles are going to operate, how it's going to put a bit more skill into it. So as I have mentioned previously, or you may have heard me mention previously on some other videos, that I used to do modding for Freelancer. I was part of the modding community and I was involved in one of the very big mods, doing a lot of the coding and everything else at one of the points in time. And we were involved with cracking some bits and pieces and everything else, even though the game was never really designed for modding. Modding expanded the life of Freelancer beyond belief. But one of the things that we used to sort of encounter as a problem in there was the issue of missiles and torpedoes and people spamming it, because it became a very noob tactic, shall we say, and using noob as in N00B. Yeah, it's that term that basically you could use missile spam to fight in combat in a lot of these space sims, and Freelancer had this problem. Technically Privateer had it, but you know, no one complained about it because it was a single player game, so it was only the NPCs that were suffering at it. But in Freelancer, because it was PvP, people get to see other people doing it, and it used to become quite controversial, which was this whole idea of torpedo spam. And the tactic is pretty straightforward. It's not just like Privateer or Freelancer that had this problem. It was any space sim has the same problem. And the idea is that you basically line up against the opposing craft, you fly towards them, and at the last minute you turn around, as you time it right, you just launch the missiles and just basically fire 20 missiles straight into the face of the enemy. And nothing can dodge around it because there's not enough time to launch countermeasures. You know, the missiles come straight out, bang, straight into the opposing target, bang, the target's dead. And it's a real noob tactic. It used to really frustrate people, you know, because, you know, if you're flying a craft that you like the look of, because it was an awesome looking craft, but it was mostly a gun craft, or it was just like you're reliant on it, you know, or you had these people who just went out and bought craft that just had excess torpedoes capacity. And there was no skill really involved in that tactic. It was just literally who could launch their missiles the quickest. And you might say, well, maybe it is a skill in who can launch their missiles the quickest, but it doesn't feel like a skill for combat. It doesn't feel like a proper dogfight. It's just like over very quick. It's very unsatisfying for the losing party. Now, that sounds bad because it's like always someone's going to be a losing party. And could you have a satisfying fight as a losing party? Well, the answer is yes, you can. You can have a satisfying fight if you feel that the fight was on a ground that was a bit more fair and a bit more sort of level playing field, and it wasn't just a case of just the luck of the draw, someone spamming the missiles at the right time. Timing is still a part of it, but just missile spamming is just so easy to do. And was such a sort of game winner so quickly. It's basically the equivalent in space sims of the sniper for FPS. You know, everyone hates the sniper because, you know, a lot of people see it as easy mode, and technically so is missile spam. It's the same sort of concept. It's easy mode, and if you want to have a proper dogfight, if you want to turn around and do something with a bit more skill involved, then missiles are the bane of the fight. They just get in the way. So if you're going to have missiles in a game like this, you're going to need to actually introduce them in a way in which they've got to be incorporated in a way that actually makes them require a bit more skill and gives it a little bit more to it than just basically the idea of fire and forget. You know, I can just fly at the opposing opponent and just hit the missile button several times and bang, they're dead. It's got to be a little bit more than that. The thing is, by the nature of what a missile is, it technically is a fire and forget weapon. So it is, you've got a bit of a tricky one there of being able to make them to have that sort of ethos of a fire and forget weapon, like you expect missiles to be, while also incorporating an element of skill and not making it such a noob weapon, sort of the newbie style, basically killing things really easy mode. So yeah, there's this concept I saw in there that they had this idea of like having the missiles have like 3 different modes. So they got like a startup mode, they got like the boost mode, and then they got the guidance mode or whatever. I can't can't remember what it exactly was. They introduced this idea, the concepts of it, and the way you saw it was like it comes out the craft and it's almost sort of like pops out in a slowly and then suddenly just accelerates rapidly, and there's like these different stages in which the missile's got to be, and the missiles now have fuel. That's the other idea, so that they can run out of fuel, that they actually have to have some tactics in it, which means for like an opposing player, this can be actually pretty good, because now not only do you have the option of countermeasures, you've also got the option of outrunning missiles. So if you outrun a missile far enough, or you follow a missile around long enough, you will be able to get away from that missile, and the missile will run out of fuel, and that's it, you won't get hit by the missile. I think that's awesome. Or, you know, it's going to introduce some additional elements to it, so it means that your timings on missiles isn't going to be just such a case of, okay, let's just fly straight to the opposing player and then launch the missiles, because the missiles need that little warm-up time. That's going to give the opposing player more time to be able to actually go, well, actually, I need to dog out the way. And we're talking about dogfighting, and dodge out the way, or turn around and fire my countermeasures, and it's going to give them that option, longer chance to actually spot them, rather than it just being missiles at the last minute straight into their face as they're approaching the opposing player. This said, I mean, the idea is they're trying to get away from this idea of turrets in space, or the lancing idea, which is, you know, like you got two people sort of jousting like like knights with their lances, back and forward constantly, which is what a lot of that space dogfighting combat can be like in a lot of space games, and actually introducing more elements to it, and there's a bit more sophisticated elements, and so this ideas with these sort of missiles and everything else, I think they can actually pretty good, and hopefully remove a bit of the stigma as well that's associated with using missiles in close combat, because again, you know, that what I was mentioning about missiles being easy mode. That means if you do like using missiles, then let's be fair, using a missile can be very satisfying for the person firing and using the missile when it works right. But you get a lot of stigma because you're spamming missiles, and yeah, it's easy mode, it's noob mode. And yeah, it causes a bit of problem in that sense. So if you can take away, make it a bit more skillful, make it so that there is still a lot of skill and it's not any different to, or it's sort of comparable to what you're doing with normal dogfighting outside of missiles, so like gun-on-gun action, then yeah, I'm all for that. I think that's a fantastic option, because it's also going to reduce the stigma of those who do like using missiles, which means then if you become a missile operator, using these operator modes on a ship, it then feeds back into that is actually a viable thing, and not just that you're the new sniper, basically basing it on first-person games, which is going to be really, really handy. So yeah, I mean, that's the option I like with those sort of things. But talking about gameplay, let's talk about capacitors. Now, the beginning of Inside Star Citizen began with capacitors, and it was talking about the way it was, and I had to watch it a couple of times just to get my head around it, I had to admit, and looking at some of the forums, or some of the Discord channels at least, anyway, some of the people also seemed a little bit confused on it. Now, if I am reading this right, so please correct me if I get it wrong, because some people have been thinking that this means that with the introduction of capacitors, that they're basically saying that you're going to have to micromanage power levels all the way through the dogfight. That the whole concept is that you go into the dogfight, you're flying around, and you've got to turn around and use your capacitors wisely all the way through it all. And if you don't use your capacitors, then that's it. You're just not going to be able to dogfight. That's not what I was getting out of it. Basically, I see it like this. This is the explanation from what I've seen from the Inside Star Citizen. The capacitors is basically like a booster. It's a boost system. So essentially, if you didn't use capacitors, you could go into a fight, you could fight with your weapons, you could fight, your shields would be up, your engines would run, and you would fight just like you do now normally. The idea of the capacitors is it gives you an advantage. So when you activate a capacitor, what will happen is that it will give a boost to one of your systems, but in response to that, obviously it is a consumable, it's going to turn around and have a cooldown time on it, but it's also going to have a knock-on effect. And one of the ones that was put on the Discord was the idea of, like, you know, if you were like coming in for the kill shot on someone, maybe you might divert power, use a capacitor to divert power away from your shields into your weapon, so that your weapon is a more powerful shot and finishes off the enemy, but you sacrifice your shields, so you better make sure you hit, because if you don't hit, your shields are down. So you're suddenly at a disadvantage because you didn't hit with the shot that was more powerful at the beginning. And if it's that kind of play, then that kind of play sounds awesome. And let's just put it in perspective. It's like, if you don't use capacitors, then yes, you could still go on and take on NPCs. You can fight like you do now normally. You would turn around and activate your guns, target them, shoot them down, not a problem. You can do that sort of kind of capacitor play, that normal sort of non-capacitor play, and that will work quite well against NPCs and low-skilled PvP players. But if you want to become then the PvP elite, I can see like the elite PvP players are the ones who will know how to use capacitors and when to use them correctly. So they'll be the ones that will go into the combat, and instead of just relying on their weapon systems and shields as they are, they will activate the capacitors at the right point in time, knowing what the drawbacks are, using it to minimize the weakness of that drawback, like for example the kill shot losing shields, but will maximize the actual firepower or maximize their boosts, their maneuverability as is required at the particular point in time. And if that is the case, then that will make PvP so much more interesting, because it's not just a case of now two people jousting in space. As we mentioned a minute ago, we will also be about like knowing when to use your capacitors correctly, what capacitors to use and when to use them, and knowing how to get around the shortcomings of each capacitor, because each type of capacitor might have a different effect. Basically, thinking of it like consumables that you get in the mining trade. You know, if you're doing miners and you've got the whole consumable things there, it's basically that for combat. But that's what I took away from the capacitors. And if it's that, then it'll work very well, because it means that you can do that either against skilled PvP players, will be basically the more elite you are, the more capable you are with the capacitors, but also means like even on an environmental thing against NPCs, PvE sort of style, then if you've got the higher challenges will also require knowing the capacitors. So, you know, you might have different skill levels of like emissions and stuff like that, and the higher skill ones, you need to know how to use capacitor. The lower skill ones, don't worry about capacitors because it's just point and shoot, but the higher skilled ones, yeah, you're going to need to know how to use your capacitors, otherwise you're going to have a tough time otherwise. So yeah, I think capacitor play could be very, very, very cool in that sense. And the one thing that I didn't notice mentioned in that video, and again, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, please do correct anything I say. If I say anything and it's wrong, let me know in the comments, or you know, if you've got your own views on anything I say, please leave a comment as well to say about it. But capacitor play could also be very handy as an operator mode as well. So it wasn't mentioned in that video about it being that, even though the beginning of the video was about capacitors and the second half was mentioned about operator modes, and then they went on to talk about missiles. But you can imagine that capacitors could be a operator mode as well. So you could have on a big capital ship that you might have someone piloting, someone else targeting the main cannon, someone else dealing with missiles, and someone else dealing with the capacitors, knowing when to activate the right capacitors to work with that big capital ship. And I imagine capacitors might be different depending on the type of ship that you're flying, you know. So if you've got a small fighter, the capacitors using that is going to be very different than what you need to use than what you use on a big ship. But to activate the right capacitors on a big ship, it might be like, right, at this point in time, we're taking a pounding, we need to activate these shields really solid. Which point you're actually saying, not just like making a decision for one or two people. If you're talking about a big capital ship like a Javelin, you're actually locking out like the weapon systems guys. So the guys with weapon systems suddenly find themselves without weapons, without fire. And it's like, why is that? It's because the guy who's in charge of the capacitors has realized that you're got a greater need for increasing your shields because your shields are about to drop, or things like that, you know, that sort of thing. So that could be really, really, really cool on that one. And using that as a bit of a segue of talking about capital ships, let's move into something else to do with capital ships, which is Invictus Launch Week, which is coming up very, very soon. And if you have been, I mentioned it in last week's episode, but this week's episode, over this last week, I've seen a lot of stuff coming out of the test servers, because they've been doing a lot of the tests for Invictus Launch Week on the test servers. And there's been a few spoilers in there. If you don't want spoilers about what's coming up in Invictus Launch Week, tune out now. Otherwise, please stick with us a second. I'll talk about what's going on there. But some of the stuff that we have seen coming out is going to be very exciting. I'm looking forward to it coming on the play on the normal persistent universe, so I get a chance to actually look at it myself in the servers there. The first one is that obviously they've got the Redeemer gunship's going to be making an appearance by the looks of it. They're sitting on the showroom floor. It's apparently the Redeemer gunship from what we have seen from some of the leaks that have been coming out. That may be wrong, but that's what I've seen from the leaks. It looks like that, and it looks nice. It has been talked about for a few months as this has been sort of reworked, and it's going to be come back into the game for the people who have been looking forward to that one. And it looks quite a nice model of ship actually. So I'm in two minds about that. If it's available, I may take a look, and I may be tempted with that. That ship looks very, very interesting. But going back to the capital ships and the segue we're talking about, it's like capital ships has been the big focus of the last week about what's coming out of the play test servers there. On the test servers, they've been showing that, first of all, the Javelin which was available last year in the Invictus Launch Week. I remember showing it when I did my series last year on the Invictus Launch Week. I showed the Javelin from the outside, and it was like turning up at the docks with all these fireworks going off and being flanked by a couple of Idris. The Javelin now has its internal components done, or it's done its internal side to it done, so it's available for internal tours. And it kind of sort of, I'm guessing it's partly due to Squadron 42, because one of the interesting things with Star Citizen is that you've also got the single player game, Squadron 42, that's also being developed. And while they're not talking about it or revealing as much because they don't want to reveal storyline and plot elements and stuff like that, it is kind of being more worked on than Star Citizen, but we're seeing more in Star Citizen than we're seeing on Squadron 42. It's the weird side about it. But there is a lot of crossover between the two, and things like the military vessels, like the Javelin, for example, is one of those examples. So by seeing this Javelin with interiors, it's basically CIG not only just turning around and saying, like, you know, we've got the Javelin here with its interior, but like, we've got the interior done for Squadron 42. This is like, you can move around the ship in Squadron 42, as was being planned all along with it, the whole thing, you know, with some of the playthroughs that you've seen. You can now move around properly in the ship. We've got the internals sort of done, and you can do that, and that option is going to be available. And we're showing you what that's like. It's kind of like a sneak peek in Star Citizen as to what the interior of the Javelins are going to look like when you go into Squadron 42. Which is quite interesting. But the other one as well, I mean, I'm looking forward to getting inside the ship, because that's a big ship. It's like an 80 crew vessel. It's a very high crewed vessel. It's available as a player ship as well, which is mad in itself. But it's going to be interesting to see that one. But the other one that's turned up as well that we've seen, and it's been hinted at over the weeks, they've turned around, dropped some little hints and pieces, and it's started turning up on the test service, the Bengal carrier, which this is a ship that is, from what I've heard from some people saying, it's over 2 kilometers long, which is massive. And you know, you look at it on the screens of like some of the the videos coming out from the test server, and you initially think, it doesn't look that big. Doesn't look like 2 kilometers, and then you see it next to a C3, you know, to the C3 Hercules, and the C3 Hercules looks like it's a fighter craft next door to the Bengal. It's like, it looks tiny. It looks absolutely tiny, and you're like, okay, maybe it is quite big then as a ship itself. It looks interesting. Obviously, they haven't done the internals yet of the Bengal carrier, from as far as we know. No one's come out and sort of said that, you know, they've been able to crack any internal sort of layout for the Bengal carrier. But the Bengal carrier is an even bigger ship than the Javelin, and that's going to be showing up in Invictus Launch Week as well. I'm going to really look forward to reviewing that one as well. But this has been Citizen in the Verse. This is my second episode. If you have, if any of this has been enjoyable, if any of this has made sense, or if you've got, even if it hasn't, but you turn around and you've got a different opinion and you want to leave a comment below, but you still feel that this is turning around and giving you some thought-provoking material to work with, please leave us a like, please leave us a subscription. As I say, it's a brand new channel, so I need all the help I can to get this boosted up at the moment. And if you're into things like Minecraft, go and check out my main channel, Draken Gameworks. If you're into Satisfactory, go and check out Draken Gameworks 2, my second channel, which I put most of my other games on other than Star Citizen and Minecraft. And don't forget, we've also got all sorts of streams and everything else going on. But in the meantime, I've been Draken, you guys take care, and we'll see you again soon. Bye!